Back to Walter Benjamin. There is a piece from Walter Benjamin's theory on the philosophy of history that will hopefully legitimize what I said earlier about The Guardian being weird with its kind of the poster that it made, but also other things like commercials that we're seeing or stuff that we're seeing on TV, videos, images that are being thrown at us during this coronavirus period. We should be careful because they speak in a language that is kind of worrying. But I'm not going to read the entire essay by Walter Benjamin. That would be crazy and probably take the whole length of the show. But I can provide some type of overview of it. The piece was originally written and published in 1942. And for decades, it was looked down on. But essentially, this is a philosophical piece that questions the ways in which history is told. And also points out that there are ways in which history can be foretold. Actually, that's not right to say. It's more like he points out the ways in which history can actually be seen as it happens. And that is particularly true of things that are commercial, mainstream, and part of pop culture. Or part of the things that are meant to provide an escape from the harshness of our everyday lives. For example, right? I'm loving the Twilight Zone series at the moment, the original one. But I'm noticing that at least in the first season, which I'm still currently on, there are hardly any episodes where the lead character is a woman. This should have been seen as a sign of a lack of gender equality and representation, but at the time, it was a normal thing. Not to mention that in American television at that time, there was hardly any show that represented African American communities. But none of these things were questioned at the time, despite the fact that they were right in front of the audience's eyes. And they were being passed as something that was meant to be entertaining, fun, or lighter than the more complex things that make up the fabric of life, like fine arts. So the piece that I'm about to show you is a piece that feels terribly recent, despite the fact that, like I said, it was written in 1946. Now, I'm not going to specifically interpret it because I would love to encourage anybody listening to it to make up their own minds about it and perceive it in the ways that they feel the piece should be perceived. This is also a thing I'm trying out to see whether something like this can be possible within a radio show like the art movement, where I aim to defy the expectations of what a radio show that revolves around art and culture should be, where I get silly and talk about the more lowbrow stuff as well as the highbrow stuff. If that makes any sense, I'm not sure whether it does. But so I'm going to read part 8 of Walter Benjamin's theses on the philosophy of history and see what you can make out. And see how you perceive the piece and see if you can tell or agree with me in saying that it says a lot of truths even of today's world. All right. The tradition of the oppressed teaches us that the state of emergency in which we live is not the exception but the rule. We must attain to a conception of history that is in keeping with this insight. Then we shall clearly realize that it is our task to bring about a real state of emergency. And this will improve our position in the struggle against fascism. One reason why fascism has a chance is that in the name of progress, its opponents treat it as a historical norm. The current amazement that the things we are experiencing are still possible in the 20th century is not philosophical. This amazement is not the beginning of knowledge, unless it is the knowledge that the view of history which gives rise to it is untenable.